Welcome to the Find My Catalyst podcast. We all have problems we're looking to solve, and we know that there are solutions out there, but we struggle with this. How do we find the solution? Where's the nudge come from to help us take the next step and start solving tough problems? This podcast is designed to help you find your catalyst and take that next step. I'm Mike Simmons. I'm the founder of Catalyst Sale. This episode is brought to you by the Catalyst Sale Game Plan. It's our approach to goal setting and execution. If you head to catalystsale.com/game, you can find out more information. My catalyst today is Jen Igartua. Jen is the CEO of Go Nimbly and a leader in the revenue operations space. Jen, it is awesome to finally meet you and have this conversation. I've been looking forward to this since I first sent a follow-up to you after hearing you on the Sales Hacker podcast with Sam Jacobs. So thanks for joining me today. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good. Monday morning, you're my first meeting and interaction, so I'm pumped.
And you've got like your background, just to provide a little bit of context, and we don't do video on the podcast, but you have plants and then you have paintings of plants.
Mural.
And it's like you've been attacked by a florist in this office. Why plants?
Something that's so funny. Actually, I wasn't really big into plants. Plants was my COVID habit that came out of nowhere. I definitely had, right before COVID, I had a white house, very much like kind of minimalist, no decor. And I got into painting every wall. The one behind me that you see was actually painted by one of my roommates. Her name's Emily Kaisip, and she makes incredible murals. If you're in the New York area, she can paint you one, but she's a really incredible artist and everything's really hand drawn. She did it all through COVID. It took her months. So I'm pretty lucky to have a big colorful background now.
It looks absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
So as you've gone through kind of this process of replanting and doing these things, do you find that there are things you can take from your work that apply to what you do with planting, or is it more of a release?
I'll take your question and kind of A to C it. I don't necessarily bring my work into my life, but I bring my life into my work a lot.
Okay.
I do feel like it should not be one of those things where at 5 o'clock I change personalities. I try to be myself and let myself show up in every interaction. I do find that like my superpowers at work, which is like making fast decisions and kind of pushing through ambiguity, kind of make me less fun in my real life. Like if we're all going out to dinner, like you kind of want to let the banter of friends decide instead of being like, we will be going to this restaurant. I already booked a reservation and we're on. So I actually try to find myself like be a lot more easygoing in life than I am at work. And then the other thing I really love doing is improv. And I've found that improv makes me more fun to work with and a better person to work with. This idea of active listening and supporting your scene partner and yes-anding and team wins. And it's made me, over the last 5 years, I think it's made me a better coworker.
How'd you get into improv?
Oh, good question. Oh my gosh. I took a class. I don't remember what inspired me. I think I went to a show and I was like, that looks really fun. And then I signed up. It was back when there was UCB, Upright Citizens Brigade, that is here in New York City. It closed due to the pandemic. There's still one in LA. Signed up for a class and then I got hooked. It's like 3 hours of just being an idiot and laughing was like such a huge stress relief for me.
Is there something that changed in you after you started getting into it? Like as you embraced it, did something change either in the way that you think or the way that you interact with others? Did something change?
Sure. Yeah. There was one class where I think at the end of it, we had a scene that was really fun and really funny, but I played a very background role. Like I was what's called grounded the scene. I was a very realistic character. I was just there to say, that's crazy. I don't want to do that. Or, if somebody's like, jump off the building, you go, that I would never do that. And you make the other person, the interesting person in the scene. And I still had the best time. And we all celebrated after that. It was a really fabulous scene and a fabulous show. And it just made me realize there's no such thing as kind of an individual win. And it's a team win. And it's literally no fun if you go to watch an improv show and everyone's trying to be the star. And it gave me a little bit of grounding when we do workshops or when we're ideating or in meetings, that the person that is moving the conversation along or facilitating is just as important as the person that's kind of in there running the show. And it gave me a new perspective of honestly not trying to win as much because I'm very competitive and trying to just have a team win instead. And that was a huge light bulb moment for me.
Yeah, it really, as you say it, the word that comes to mind is enablement, which gets into a lot of what we're going to get pretty deep into. But you're enabling others. You're you're building others up. You're enabling them. You're not trying to pull away. Is that fair?
Yeah, for sure. We call it like space to play. It's like, how do you know what somebody's working on? So if I know, for example, that you are trying to be a better public speaker, well, the next time that I have an opportunity to public speak, I might have you come along and do a section in it. Like I create space for you to test things out in a really safe space. And it's a kind of apprenticeship model that especially I run a services company, especially in a services company, you need an apprenticeship model. Like that's how people, a huge part of how people learn. It's not, read this how-to document and you're good to go. It's see somebody else doing it, have the space to practice and get feedback. And that kind of space to play is like the mentality that I have so that, people know they're playing, they're testing, they're trying things out. It doesn't feel like, I almost don't like it space to like, it's a safe space to fail. Like, I don't know. It's like, come play. Like, let's keep it positive. Like, let's create an environment where people want to try things out.
So why do we fall into the trap of, and I'm going to make an assumption here, but why do we fall into a trap of not listening to people, not being aware of what people want to do and create this tension or this extra friction when ultimately people want to, I believe people want to do things. They don't necessarily want to be told this is what you need to do. But so why do we fall into the trap of not listening or making assumptions around what we think people want rather than getting deeper and really understanding where do they want to go?
I'm going to need to go to a university and become a psychologist to be able to answer that. I don't know. I mean, it's such like a human tendency. I think that we want to fit people in a certain place. It takes a long time to realize that people want to be treated as they want to be treated, not how you want to be treated. And there's all these light bulb moments as a manager where you have to kind of, the way that we've had it is you have to go through the trenches to realize like, oh, shoot, like not everybody wants it the way I want it. Not everybody wants to be managed the same way. In terms of like tension and listening, I actually do think a lot about in an organization, how do you dispel tension? How do you get rid of tension? Yep. Because it's going to happen. This is going to feel like a weird anecdote. It's not even mine, but have you ever watched the show The Bachelor?
I am aware of The Bachelor.
Okay,
I don't know that I've ever sat and watched an entire Bachelor season. I also know that there are some people who used to do like Bachelor parties where they would go and viewing parties and they'd watch together. Sure. So I'm aware of The Bachelor. Yep. I've stumbled on it before, but I've not intentionally watched it.
That's so lucky for you because you have like 26 seasons you could binge. But if you know the general, idea is, X number of women or X number of men going after one, person. Sure. And every time they get together, there's usually a villain, right? And then that villain gets kicked out. And then the next week, there's a new villain. And then that villain gets kicked out. And the next week, there's a new one. And if you kind of look at that, it's that tension is going to find a place in a group. Like it's going to find someone, it's going to find a tension point. And that happens on teams too. There's like this place where it just wants to be there. And by teaching your team how to have hard conversations, by being a leader and identifying it and like working to be like, like this doesn't belong here. If you think about it as like this big, dark, hairball that's like kind of like sitting somewhere, like get rid of it. Because I think that that's what it's like unspoken tension between people, this issues in communicating, having something that you're holding on to, whatever that is. If we can get better at just calling it out, getting it out and moving on, it makes teams work so much better.
It really does. Yet these things continue to persist. Like even with when you throw a book out there, like Radical Candor as an example, and people will watch the YouTube video, they'll read the book, and then they don't execute, they don't apply it. Or when things get hard, it doesn't work, or they cherry pick components of it. So what have you done, or how have you worked with folks to help break down some of these challenges so that we can get through the tension or through that piece of friction and come out of this better on the other end? Because anytime that we've gone through tough things, anytime that we've experienced tough stuff together, you tend to, and get through it, you feel better about it on the other end. It's when you're not able to get through it that you feel regret and disappointment, at least in my experience. So how can we do better in these operating environments to foster that kind of environment?
Yeah. And I think creating a healthy team, it's the one thing that you talked about, right? Is like understand the frameworks, have everybody read these amazing books, talk about feedback being a gift, get people to ask for feedback, teach people how to have hard conversations. Like there's definitely that skill component. But not everybody's going to have the same skills. One, it's not going to come easy. Some of us are conflict avoidant. Some of us have a difficult time speaking up, whatever that might be. Then you need everybody on the team also there to back you up when you need it. And that doesn't mean just your manager. It's on our team. It's not just my job to go around and make sure everybody's working well together. It's everybody's job to make sure that you're identifying that like things are not going well, that you step up and call it out and have a discussion about it. Because it's my expectation is not that everybody can be super skilled at conflict resolution, but everybody can identify it and want to fix it.
Yeah. Well, and it brings me back to what you were describing with improv, is you have these different characters and these different roles that are happening, and breaking down some of the assumptions, being really clear about listening, knowing what the role is so that you can enable others. So let's shift. We went through this the psychology part, the psychology and the pop culture part of the discussion. So let's shift into kind of what is revenue operations and why are so many people, at least I think so many people are talking about it today. Why are more and more people talking about it? What is revenue operations?
Yeah, I think now revenue operations, like director of RevOps, is higher than director of sales ops. So it's not just you thinking that people are talking about it. It's definitely a huge kind of buzzword and a huge change in the industry. And, I think that it's also leading to us getting misused. So you asked me about a definition of RevOps. And I do think that depending on who you ask, and especially because actually the conversation is led a lot by technologists who are part of the RevOps tech stack, but aren't necessarily revenue operators or aren't necessarily like that in depth on how to run a RevOps team. So I think that it does get a little bit muddy. So I'll give you what our definition is. Number one, it's a framework. I think that's important, right? It's a framework. I would say RevOps is not the goal, it's the way, right? We're talking about how to structure, and the work is not what we're talking about when we talk about how to create a revenue operations team. The work is the same. The work is the same as it was 3 years ago. We're just talking about structuring it differently. So it's a framework. And, the whole goal of revenue operations is to close gaps in the customer experience. And the reason we do it is to maximize LTV. That's the big idea, right? We know that a frictionless buying experience creates more revenue. That's where we're going with it. And then what we're finding is the problem is that sales, marketing, and CS teams, they're going to be siloed. And I'm not here to try to de-silo our go-to-market teams. They have specific skill sets. They have specific work. I don't need an SDR knowing how an MQL is scored, and I don't need them knowing how we create trial campaigns. Like, I don't need them holistically knowing that they're playing a role. They're an actor. And then on the backbone, the directors are the revenue operators. And for a long time, they were siloed too. So now you had these like marketing, sales, and CS teams completely siloed with their operators also siloed. There was nothing bringing those teams together. And that's why all handoff points are sort of the easiest thing. Like, if I want to go look good in front of a client, I'm going to talk to them about their handoffs. I'm going to tell them how bad they are. Like, I know that that's where it's broken. So the idea is, why don't we unify those go-to-market operations teams? We call them RevOps. I don't care if it's called GTM Ops. I don't care if it's, whatever you want to call it, it's fine. People get wrapped up a little bit in RevOps. But it's one team, the directors of this go-to-market team, prioritizing this customer experience so they make more revenue.
So how has this evolved? Like, just if we go back over the course of the last couple of years and say, all right, here is where we are today. Where were we, let's say, 3 to 5 years ago?
Sure. It's funny. We started Go Nimbly now, I guess, 6-7 years ago.
Okay.
And when we had our tagline, it was called Unifying the Business Stack. So we were definitely like technology forward. And we were talking about like, you have all these tools and they're not integrated. And we were working to integrate those things. And the problem was already there. Even us as Go Nimbly, we hadn't really realized exactly how to solve it all. But we knew that one of the big things we needed to do is unify the technology stack, and that we couldn't have technology sitting with 3 different teams. Sales couldn't own Salesforce, and marketing couldn't own Marketo. Like, it was like, well, they integrate and the workflow goes into both tools. So like, how could we do that? So the problem has persisted. It's not a new problem. And, when we finally kind of started talking about it being revenue operations, talking about breaking down not just technology silos, but data silos, people silos, process silos, wherever that's happening, then, it truly was, okay, we need this kind of holistic revenue operations mindset. I would say in the last 3 to 5 years, I would even say 2, but 3 years ago, any sales cycle I was having, I was explaining what is RevOps all the time. Like, what is it? What are you talking about? And then I would say about a year ago, like last year, I was still talking about why RevOps. I was having a lot of, and that still happens a little bit today, but it was like, why should we do this? How do I convince everybody, what's the why? Now I'm having more and more conversations about the how. So like, it's become less ambiguous now. I think all the Gartner and all the serious decisions, like data that's coming out, those are big names saying, go do this. And so we're getting a lot of like, okay, cool. I want RevOps and my company gets it. And then now the ambiguity is like, what does that mean? Because it's more than an org chart. It's like, I can draw you up an org chart in 10 minutes. So, how does that actually change my company? And now we're getting really into the how.
So let's say someone's looking to do this inside their organization. Like, wow, this sounds absolutely amazing. You mean we can operate in an environment where we can align what's happening on the customer side and what's happening inside the business and what's happening on the people side. And we will have this coordinated effort where transitions aren't baton handoff. They're actually a transition that seems seamless to the person who's being forced through the transition. Do I just hire a RevOps manager or go out and put
Fingers
a post out there saying, hey, I want to have RevOps, and now all of a sudden magic is going to happen inside my organization?
Yeah. Unfortunately, no. I wish that was as easy as that, right? That'd be so wonderful. You're just like, great, we want to do it. And you get the immediate impact. I hate myself already for saying this. It's like, I was joking about it with Jordan Henderson on his podcast, where it's like the live, love, laugh sign. It's like RevOps is a journey, right? Like that's honestly, it's a transition. It's the teaching your team how to do it differently. And so when we think about like the how behind the work, again, the work isn't changing. I'm still going to be implementing a lead routing tool. I'm still going to get Chili Piper in there. I'm still going to need a gong or a chorus. I'm still going to do a sequencing tool with Outreach or Salesloft. Like the work is still happening. And so why would it be any different? And that is a culture change and an education change for your operators, which is, I'll give you an example of what it felt like before and what it should feel like. And then that's the work, which is, okay, when we used to do road mapping, and we used to do this wrong. Like I had a process document and had a roadmap from 5 years ago that I'm embarrassed about, which is, it was like step 1, like document everything that we've already committed to. Great, like that's in. And then step 2, interview all of your leaders and get more work that they want to do. Awesome. Step 3, get in a room with all of your revenue team and brainstorm more work, like as if this team needed more work. And I'm like thinking like, we need to exhaust this list of projects and then we'll prioritize it and we'll figure out what goes first. And that sounds silly, but that's how most teams are doing it today too, right? Like most teams are just
today, most teams are doing that. They're putting together these giant scoping documents, which then turns into a huge list of requirements and all of this other stuff. And wow, that's okay. If you're doing that today, stop.
Yeah.
Call Jen. But this is not, we don't need more lists.
Right.
We don't need more lists.
We do need a list, but I think that's the change, right? Which is start with the problem. And we've all heard start with why, and we understand it. But when you're so deep in all this firefighting and you have all these senior people, your VP of sales, your VP of marketing, VP of CX telling you, we need this, we need this, we need this, based on their experience or their intuition and their knowledge, and intuition's strong. It's not that and experience is strong. It's not that they're wrong, but they just give you this giant list of work, and now you have to prioritize it. The flip side, right? A great mature revenue operations team, what I would look for is they looked at their pipeline. Maybe they did some rep rides. Maybe they even interviewed their customers. And like looking at all those 3 things, both what we call proactive. So like go figure out what's going on, the gaps in your experience, go talk to your customers. And then also retroactive, go look at your data and tell me where you're falling down. You might say, wow, our negotiation stage is 25 days. Our whole cycle is 40. We got a problem here. And so great. What are we doing to make that velocity lower? And like, that's going to increase carry capacity. That's going to increase revenue. Awesome. Or you might talk to a customer and they told you, well, I was going to onboard more departments, but once I got handed off to the, customer experience team, I literally had to retell them my whole business. I lost so much trust in your business that like I had to see it through before I was going to recommend this to our marketing team. And you're like, okay, well, that's money. That's a problem. Our customers are telling us, what work are we doing to fix that? And that also just elevates your whole brand to the business. If you're saying we solved X problem versus we got 16 points of projects done. And that to me is what I would look at as legacy operations versus when I look at it and I go, wow, that's a badass RevOps team.
Yeah. It's one of the phrases I'm using a lot lately, and just trying to get to the point where it's actually coined by me at some point, but it's speed to impact is more important than going fast. And I'll do it like just a greater than side. Speed to impact is greater than going fast. And we get into this trap of, hey, we're going to go really, really fast. And we're going to work really, really, really hard. And we're going to do all of these things. And we've got this capacity to move quickly. But if someone steps back and looks at the overarching operation, they realize, oh, wait, we just went around in circles. And oh no, we have multiple people doing the same thing in different teams. What are we wasting? We might have been rowing in the same direction, but we've been rowing separately. And now we've wasted time and energy. And to the point that you made, we already have these lists of things that we want to do, we aim to do. And so the word that comes to mind for me in a lot of what you're describing and why I'm so excited about how this space has evolved, and I believe will continue to evolve, is better alignment. We're creating more alignment inside organizations. Is that fair?
Yeah, I do want to be a little bit careful with like alignment. Like alignment's not the goal of RevOps.
Okay, let's talk about that. Yeah. So what do you mean it's not the goal of RevOps?
Yeah, I mean, the goal of RevOps is to create a frictionless buying experience and make more money. Like alignment is kind of a prerequisite, right? I can't prioritize the best work if I don't have my business aligned, right? I can't get people working on the most important, which is the only thing we can do every day, is wake up and do the most important thing. And that's it. Like that's the power that we have every day. And so, yes, alignment is super important to get there, but alignment's not the goal. Like my goal is not to make, even though I really care about this, my goal is not to make work the most, like, I don't know, kumbaya space. And like that's great. That actually probably creates more impact, but like, that's not my goal. That's the way. Again, like, so I know it gets a little bit heady, but I think that it's an important thing. Same thing as like the sales team's not my customer. They're my stakeholder. They're my user. My customer's my customer. And I think that those things as feels like minutia, but to me, it's really important to kind of nail that.
Yeah. Well, that level of clarity really helps with decision making, right? So like as we get into things like you talked about this strength of being able to drive through, quick decision making or, effective decision making. And you don't necessarily want that to translate from what you do in the workplace into what you're doing with friends and family. And now it's, here's how we're going to go and do things. But having this structure with this guiding principle or this thing that you can go back to helps to accelerate decision-making inside organizations. It reduces uncertainty and ambiguity and gets people into a position where they can continue to focus on doing the work at the same time, know whether or not they're doing the right work. So this takes me back to something that you were talking about before, which is you've got characters who are out there, and then you've got directors who are helping make sure that the characters are moving in the right direction. Fair?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that's the easiest methodology or the easiest, metaphor for RevOps is like directors and actors, we're all making a movie, right? And so like we want the best movie experience ever. Our audience is going to watch that movie, our customers. We're trying to create the most beautiful, amazing movie that people are super engaged with and want to pay lots of money for. And, the way we're doing that is our go-to-market team, our actors are the ones engaging, the ones creating that. And we're the directors trying to make that as seamless as possible and really design that, right? We're designing the process and the handoff points and the content that, is necessary. And so I love that metaphor because I think it takes away a little bit of the ambiguity of like, what are we de-siloing versus what are we allowing to be siloed? Because I think there's this fear of the go-to-market team being affected. I'm like, no, sales leaders, marketing leaders, CS leaders, go for it. Like keep running, keep managing that customer experience. We're going to make it better from the background.
So let's talk about some common mistakes organizations make when they say, all right, you know what, we are going to embody this. We're going to build this into our culture. We're going to create a function inside the organization that does all of these things. What are some of the common mistakes that organizations make when starting on this journey?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the big one that I have seen myself and also is one that I see on LinkedIn, people complaining all the time, which is, stamp the name RevOps on it, but have it still structured exactly the same. And it's still essentially a VP of sales asking for work, and that work gets prioritized over anything else. And it's essentially a version of sales operations at its worst, what we call it RevOps. I think that that's, a really big part of it. And then
you mean there are organizations where a VP of sales throws their weight around and pushes through an agenda that may not necessarily help the business? Come on.
So rare. Yeah. I mean, I joke about how even at our companies, whenever we get a new sales leader, I'm like, all right, everybody, we're going to have to either make a really good case for why we set up the way we are, or we're going to have to redo all of our work. So like, they're going to want to come in and change all our sales stages and, bring in their methodology, et cetera. And it might be better. Like it might be a little bit better. They might be right. But is it the most important thing right now? Like, do we need to change the stages, or do we have a terrible lead handoff and it takes us 2 hours to get back to one of our leads? And should we fix that instead? Everything is about trade-offs. Like there's a really silly story, but did you know the word priorities with an S only started becoming popular in the 1940s? Like we did that. Like we made up a word essentially. Like if you look in literature, it's only the word priority that comes up. And then in the 1940s, it becomes plural. And, imagine a world where we just have one thing we really care about and that we're working on the most important thing. Now it's really difficult to get a team to say, this is the most important thing. It's really, really difficult to get them to even overstatement, right? Like we care about really, really basic, like we care about retention even over new business, or we care about new business even over retention. And get somebody to tell me one of those two things. It's almost impossible to get a leader to decide between those two. And it's like, well, got to focus on something. Like we got to fix something. Which one's going to give us the biggest lift? And I think that that's something we should all put a lot of pressure on. What are we working on? What really matters?
It brings, I don't know the name of the character because this is another one of the shows I don't watch, but I absolutely love the GIF associated with it, which is, don't half-ass two things when you can whole-ass one, from the guy in Parks and Rec. And it's insane. We as leaders struggle with decision-making and commitment relative to that thing that's most important. And then we wonder why organizations struggle with identity. And then we wonder why people allow themselves to get distracted inside our organization. So this is where, and I know we've already talked about the word, I come back to alignment, because alignment, if we are not aligned on those things, the risk is so high. But it just, and it happens over and over again. Like we just have a lot of work to do. Do we have a lot of work to do?
Yeah. The exercise that you're talking about is pulling up a couple examples, which is really interesting, is this idea. I mean, I made a really basic even over statement, right? But if you want to look at the identity, and it can be at a company level, it can be at a team level.
Okay.
I think the really fun thing is you think that just the CEO is here doing like the visioning of a team and where we're going. Like you can do that at your level. You can do visioning statements for the next quarter. You can do even over statements. Define your priority. It has to roll up to the other one, but like there is a different subculture and a different team dynamic that you actually can make a lot of influence on, even at a large company. But there's this concept of even over statements I was teasing, which if we take some famous companies like, okay, Amazon, it's market penetration even over profit. Both things are important. It's not that they're not important, but they're going like when they're based on a decision, they'll go market penetration first. If you look at Airbnb, it's living like a local even over hospitality, like it's not a good word for it. Like even over, I guess, hotel. God, what's a good word for it? Even over like the hotel basics. Like they're not caring if you have an iron or not. They're not caring if you have like the most pristine room, right? Like they're taking that away. It's all about like living like a local. Or In-N-Out Burger, it's speed and consistency even over variety. And so you have these things that make a team know what to choose when it's hard. And that's what we're trying to do, is like faster decision making when it's hard, not when it's easy. I can pick two things when one doesn't matter.
What are some of the things that make it hard? What are some examples of like, what are some things that we might not think about that make decision making hard?
So what I'm talking about is like, if there's no clarity on what's important, then like, how do you let anybody decide other than your leader? And so it's not necessarily that it's easy to decide. Like it's hard to make choices when it's two important things, or when there's a huge fire, or when you're just not sure. And there's a concept from a book called Brave New Work called The Waterline, which is like, if I was on a boat and, we're all sailors and you want to make a change to the boat, if you do it above the waterline, awesome. Like that's not going to sink the ship. We're going to be all right. You want to put a new flag up? Awesome. You want to do it below the waterline? You better be really careful, really certain. You better have talked to other people. You better have gotten approval. You have oversight. You have risk mitigation, because you make a hole in that ship, we're going down or we're going off course. And so what if you designed that waterline for your team, which is like, hey, if it's above the waterline, go for it, experiment, do new things, make decisions. If it's below the waterline, then like, all right, get a cohort together, make sure that the right people are in the room, make sure we're deciding together. If you can define that and lower that, like define that and also work to lower that waterline so that more and more decisions can be made by your team, that's clarity, then you're going to innovate more. And that's where the fun is. If you have everybody asking for permission for, hey, can I do this email? Can I do cheers instead of goodbye? It's like, yeah, it's fine. But like, how do you define that so that people aren't in fear that they're going to choose the wrong thing?
And as you're describing it, realize that the waterline will change as the organization evolves. So as much as you want it to get lower and lower and lower, but as the boat gets bigger and bigger and bigger, now the waterline starts to shift. It's really powerful metaphor to apply. I think it's a metaphor. English is not my strength.
Me either. I'm Spanish, so I get it.
So really cool way to look at this and say, all right, where's our waterline, and how do the people inside our organization know that?
Yeah.
And what's their view of it? And how does that shift over time as they go through? Really, really powerful stuff. So let's shift into how organizations can work to solve this, right? So we went through and we said, hey, here's what our definition is. And we start with framework. Ultimately what we're doing is looking to reduce friction in the buyer journey, the customer journey, so that those gaps are closed, so that the business continues to grow. Then we got into some of the challenges that happen inside the organization when people are just doing the work, and you get so focused on the work, you forget some of the characters that are around us. And we also got into the discussion around, we could sit down there and write out a crap load of things that can be done and get everybody's perspective on what those things are that need to be done. But we still have to keep going through and doing work. And there are ways to simplify around what problem are we solving for, and why is that important, and who's impacted by it. So let's start to get into the how behind pulling these things together, and maybe even the frequency that organizations should be revisiting the stuff, whether it's you had a post recently where you talked about how the roadmap continues to evolve.
Yeah.
So what do we do? How do we start to fix this? Is there a frequency? How often do we want to revisit it?
Totally. So I'm pulling up a little thing right now, which is, if we think about our team as an operating system, what would be all the components? You talked about being a technical guy. You would have been an engineer at some point. So like, let's design a team, right? Like let's design, and it can be either by process or by culture. Like you can solve any problem with those two things, right? I can either define a system on how to do something if I have a problem, or I can let my culture, fix that problem. Yep. So all of these that I'm going to say do not have to be, SOPs that tell you, step by step. They could be cultural. It could be like a value that the company has. And so we talked about, we need to know the North Star. Like, how do we orient and steer the ship? We need to know that North Star. We talked about how to prioritize and how to plan. That's road mapping, right? So like, we need a roadmap to tell us like, this is what we're doing to help us prioritize this. Then there's all these other things. I'm going to spew them off, but there's all these other things that help the team work. So like, what's the structure? How do we organize? How do we collaborate together? Part of that is the org chart. Part of that is how we share authority. There's all sorts of stuff in there. There is how we innovate. Like, how do we allow this team to learn and evolve? Because we don't want it stagnant. There's membership. How do we cultivate relationships with each other? How do we make sure that this team is, creating relationships with the go-to-market team, or with the finance team, or with product team? Like RevOps touches everything. How do we meet? Like, as simple as that. Like, what are our core meetings? How do we meet? How do we convene together? How often in person? How often in the office? Like all those things. What's the workflow? How do we divide the work between each other? Like, what does that look like? That could be all the way from like what tool we use to how do we collaborate with the data team when we have work together? How do we compensate? How do we incentivize each other? How do we use insights? How do we share data? So like all these things, like I spewed off a lot. There's 12 little boxes I'm looking at right now as I'm talking. But if we define those things, then we know how to work. Now, you're not going to create them in a piece of paper and be like, cool, here we go. These are things that you're going to have to mature as a team, right? When we talk about like road mapping is an example. When we talk about creating a roadmap, we focus on utility first. Like when we work with a team, we'll create a roadmap, very basic. Like, let's just get the initiatives we've already said yes to. Let's find a couple of gaps we're working with. And when a new initiative comes up, let's at least document it. And let's create a meeting every 2 weeks where we talk about it and an email out to the company saying, this is what's going on. If we do that for a quarter and we get the habit together, then we'll start incorporating things like, okay, how do we get buy-in from the rest of the team? Or how do we generate initiatives? Like, how do we ideate the right initiative? How do we do that? That skill, like there's all these skills that will make us better. Each one of those little boxes I talked about, there's a kind of maturity on it. You'll get better at, data. You'll get better at running meetings. You'll get better at innovating. Like all those things are things that this team will get better over time. But if you're missing any of those, you've got an opportunity for growth.
The thing that really resonated for me as you were going through that is the importance of a journey, of this iterative process where things are being built over time. And there are a lot of people who, someone will say, the board will say, we need to do this, or the leadership inside the organization will say, we need to do this. And it might be because they heard you on a podcast, or they saw you speak, or they saw somebody else speak, or they were having a conversation with someone who said, wow, when we implemented RevOps, actual RevOps across our organization, inside the organization, things changed. This isn't a flip the switch kind of thing.
Unfortunately. Yeah, I wish it was. My business would be easier if it was that.
And and you hit on a couple of really important pieces as well. It's the designing and definition of what the process looks like, but also understanding how the culture will continue to evolve, because people have a vote in this thing. Yeah. Not only the people that you're working with as your customers, but people that are inside your organization. And another one that jumped out at me as you were talking through it a bit earlier is, hey, when we've got a new VP of sales or head of sales that comes in, we can either make this transition less difficult, or we can have to rip and replace a bunch of stuff. And a lot of the reasons why a VP of sales might come into an organization is because they got this process that they go through and this methodology that they've adopted.
Experience-based, like they know it works and they've done it 3 more times, which I think is really valuable. There are people that are very good at taking a company from Series, D to IPO. And those people are very capable and very talented. But the whole playbook scenario is one of the things that, when we talk to our clients and they're like, wait, what does Zendesk do? How do they do it? And it's like, well, they're way beyond where you are. You're a Series C company. It doesn't matter how they forecast. It's like, come back. We can talk about that story and have some learns. I think we have to be a little bit careful about, doing it exactly the same way, especially because even though that might be correct, that might not be the fire.
And awesome conversation. We've talked a lot about kind of the definition, and then we got into some of the common mistakes that happen, and then how the thinking goes. But what does the work actually look like? What happens next? What's the next logical step? What do we need to do now? Where does the work come into play? And what does that look like?
Totally. And I think a lot about our kind of RevOps managers or analysts or Salesforce admins or all these individuals that are doing the work, that are doing this work that essentially makes go-to-market teams better. And their reality is that they're in the middle of a lot of reactive and a lot of fires. And anybody that I speak to in this position, they want to be more strategic. They want to have the time to look at metrics and pipeline and ideate how we can fix things. They want to think about how to better architect their solutions, but they're under this insane amount of pressure all the time to get things out. And so I think that when we are talking about how their lives will change, right? Like how am I winning from this? The work isn't changing. Like if I take the time to look at my pipeline and identify that there's a problem quoting, the work might still be a whole quote to cash process. That might be the same thing that the VP of sales has been telling me all along. And I might still have to do that work. So the work might not actually change, but the way in which we prioritize, the way in which we frame, that we align with the rest of the organization should. And so ideally, we use this benchmark a lot, and most people don't get there, but ideally you're doing 50% of your roadmap is planned and 50% of the work is reactive. Like if we could get to a 50-50 place, I think that this team would have a lot more impact. Right now, teams are majority reactive. majority an issue, something like whether it's a bug or whether it's like a last minute halfway through the quarter, we got to do X. And I think that's the reality that we have to think about these operators are living in is just this nonstop, must have it tomorrow, multiple priorities type of world. And also their work is complex. It's getting harder and harder. Like our technologies are more difficult. There's more of them. Our processes are more difficult. The expectations of our customers are higher. So this team also has harder work. When I was a consultant, more than 10 years ago, my work was easier than what my team does today.
Does it make sense to start to split the team up at some point where you've got people who are doing the day-to-day, keep the business running, putting out the fires, and then you've got some people who are doing maybe more of the the innovation type stuff? Like, does it make sense to do that?
So I don't know if I necessarily say like split the team, but I think there are different personas. And so there's a couple of things that make me kind of take control of what this feels like. One, it's running the machine. So like there are things we have to do to run the machine, whether it's monthly or weekly or daily tasks, things to just let this team run. And then there's innovation on top of that, which tend to be bigger projects. They tend to be larger initiatives. We don't innovate with a new field, right? Like there's larger initiatives that happen. And balancing those two things can be hard. We've actually had clients that actually almost do rotations. So because these giant projects, imagine you just acquired a new company and you have this big acquisition coming up and you spend, 9 months merging Salesforce instances. That's hard. That's like really intense work. You might need a break. You might need, a couple months rotation doing something else before your next big project. And so I think that there's some movement that can happen. There's also personas. And interestingly enough, my experience running a services company, you could take a lot of learns from that when you're building your RevOps team, which is in a lot of ways, it is a services organization. You do have these departments that you're working with. And so what's the shape of the organization? What's the seniority of that organization? And well, it has to match your roadmap. It has to match the work that's coming up. So if you had a lot of like running the machine work, then go ahead and hire some junior Salesforce admins to execute a lot of tickets, a lot of like bugs and changes. Cool. But if you come to me and you tell me that your roadmap is a CPQ implementation, a code refactoring, an MQL definition change, an implementation of, outreach and its strategy, give me a whole, I'm going to go, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to utilize that person with 6 months Salesforce experience. So that's not the shape of the organization. I think there's also like, what's the work and what kind of skill set do you need to making sure those match? And that's so hard in this particular business because the work always changes. And so how do you balance those two things?
It makes it fun. It's like, it's never a dull moment, right?
No, it's never a dull moment.
there's a lot of tension, and just going back to some of the things that you had highlighted earlier, the importance of communication, the importance of clarity so that we can make effective decisions and know how we organize things, because not everything can be the priority. Right. I have no idea that priorities was a word that was invented in the 40s. That's a bit frightening.
I'm sure it existed, but it wasn't used. So like existed, but not in used. Literature, okay. It just wasn't used. Yeah.
Wow. Jen, absolutely amazing conversation. Where can people find out more about what you're working on? Where would you like to send folks?
On LinkedIn, I'm posting all the time, so you can find me there. Our website's got a lot of great content. If you're new to RevOps, there's a whole section for RevOps 101. And then I think maybe by the time we come out with this, we might have it. But I've got my wonderful director of marketing, Christy Park, and I have been collaborating on a new ebook called Transform, where we talk about pretty much what we talked about in this conversation in more detail, like what does it take to actually create a RevOps team, all those buckets we talked about. So hopefully that's live by the time that this goes live.
Perfect. We'll include links in the show notes. If you know of someone who would benefit from this conversation, please share it. Let Jen and I know via LinkedIn. If you tag us on LinkedIn when you share it, then we know, then we can amplify, we can comment on it. Sales is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about your process?